Against this backdrop, the attempts of Western countries to justify the US and Israeli aggression as though there were some alleged threats to international peace and security are unfounded. These are threats that were allegedly coming from the Iranian nuclear program. We, of course, recall that the only source of reliable information in this regard are the relevant reports of the IAEA Director General, and those reports never indicated that. And they never said that Iran may be engaging in the development of a nuclear weapon. The objects that strikes are being launched against are under the agency's safeguards. That is to say, a priori, they cannot be used for any such activities. Against this backdrop, we expect that the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, will provide unambiguous assessments and will condemn this latest undermining of the NPT's authority and undermining of the global regime for the non-proliferation by the USA and Israel. Nuclear energy objects, including the Bushehr nuclear power plant, cannot in any circumstances be the target of strikes by armed forces. That is unacceptable. Mr. President, we note that today's events were the latest phase of consistent escalatory steps around Iran by Western countries. That includes the US-Israeli strikes on the country's territory in June 2025 and the US's open interference and the open interference by US allies in the domestic political situation in Iran in January of this year. We also remember the failed attempts by the United Kingdom, France, and Germany to trigger the mechanism to restore the effect of Security Council anti-Iran resolutions, the so-called snapback mechanism. However, that did not happen. Russia and a number of other UN member states repeatedly and in detail explained the reasons why the United Kingdom, France, and Germany did not have the right to invoke that mechanism. However, that did not work, and the United States and Israel once again have brought military force to bear. There are obvious parallels with the events of 2003 when the US representatives waved a test tube around in this room to justify their invasion of Iraq by saying that there were weapons of mass destruction present there that no one actually found. In 2023, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that the Iraq campaign was unforced. As a result, innocent Iraqis and Americans died, and that Washington had to learn that lesson. However, as it turns out, that lesson has not yet been learned. In the statements of the European colleagues, and we'll hear that again today, instead of condemning aggression and the deaths of Iranian civilians, we once again will hear the statement of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, saying the Iranian regime must understand that it has no other option but to engage in good faith negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistic programs, as well as its regional destabilization activities, end quote. Similar assessments were voiced by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. These absurd statements were then backed up by a joint statement of the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, condemning only Iran's strikes on the countries in the region. Colleagues, just think for a moment. This sort of reaction is coming at a time when Iran has been subject to armed attack, to military attack at the peak of an active negotiating process. The hypocrisy of our European colleagues knows no borders. And these aren't even double standards. It's a parallel reality. The other side of the looking glass. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe the situation: victim blaming. One gets the impression that London, Paris, and Berlin are living within illusions that they have created for themselves and are broadcasting to the world. However, attempts to mislead the international community are doomed to fail. Any common sense person will fully well understand who is responsible, who bears responsibility for this latest uncontrolled escalation. Mr. President, we demand that the United States and Israel immediately cease their aggressive actions. An alternative to resolving the Iranian subject, including its nuclear component, the alternative to peaceful and diplomatic means simply does not exist, and it never has. We insist on the immediate resumption of political and diplomatic settlement efforts and the pursuit of solutions based on international law, mutual respect, and a balance of interests. Russia unchangingly stands ready to provide all necessary assistance for that work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Secretary General for his briefing. First of all, I wish to express our firm rejection of the fact that the presidency today the meeting today is taking place under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. We wish to recall that Russia and China requested that it be held under the agenda item, threats to international peace and security. That request was also contained in the relevant letter of the Iranian colleagues. The aggression that Iran has been subjected to today threatens to lead to escalation in an already escalated region, and it could go far beyond its borders. Particularly given the fact that one of the two initiators of this military venture is far from being a state in the region. Attempts by the British presidency to artificially downplay the degree of danger of the current situation is simply unacceptable. The presidency also grossly scorned Russia and China's request to invite as a briefer to today's meeting the professor at Columbia University, Jeffrey Sachs. The British colleagues do everything they can to assert the importance of inviting representatives of civil society to Security Council meetings. That clearly does not apply to
পূৰ্বতে যদি 1000 চাউলৰ চিন্তা কৰিবলগীয়া হৈছিল, আনহাজত দাইলৰ চিন্তা। কেতিয়াবা যদি নিমখৰ অভাৱ হৈছিল, কেতিয়াবা চেনিৰ। এতিয়া আমি দাইল, চেনি আৰু নিমখ ৰাজ সাহায্যযুক্ত দৰত লাভ কৰোঁ আৰু গোটেই পৰিয়ালটোৰ বাবে চাউল পাওঁ।
The all-new Samsung Galaxy S26 series pre-booking has started on Flipkart. On Flipkart में मिलेगा guaranteed exchange value without any complicated terms and conditions. चाहे आपका फोन किसी भी ब्रांड या कंडीशन में हो, even on new phones like iPhone 16 and Samsung Galaxy.
Civilian nuclear facilities. In real time, we are getting reports from the Iranian authorities about casualties, including among the civilian population. More than 200 people have died in 24 provinces of the country. We were particularly aggrieved to learn of the strike on a girls' school in Minab, where it is reported that 85 children were killed. We sincerely express our sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the victims, and we wish a swift recovery to the injured. Our country will do everything necessary to ensure the security and safety of Russian citizens that are on the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. President, Washington and West Jerusalem's actions are nothing other than yet another unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state in violation of the Charter of the organization and of the fundamental principles of international law. They are openly aimed at further interfering in the internal affairs of Iran and at destroying a state that has found disfavor with the West. The US and Israel's irresponsible step, reckless step, as we warned previously, has already led to a sharp escalation of the situation across the region. Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Syria and Saudi Arabia have all been affected. And those countries that have repeatedly and said to their American partners that they don't need this escalation in the Middle East. Moreover, the US and Israel military operation has been a betrayal of diplomacy. These countries once again are bringing to bear military force against Iran at the very height of negotiations, just as they did in June 2025. Just the day before yesterday, on the 26th of February in Geneva, there was the latest round of US-Iranian contacts with the facilitation of Oman. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, noted that an understanding and agreement had been reached to continue the dialogue. For our part, we underscore that the Russian side has repeatedly received signals that the Israelis have no interest in a military confrontation with Iran.
Hello everyone.
And then, despite Tehran's willingness to engage in the diplomatic process, it once again is stabbed in the back. Moreover, the fact that Washington for such a long time and methodically was building up its military presence in the region only confirms the fact that aggression against Iran was planned in advance. The actions of the United States and Israel risk triggering a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Of particular concern, once again, are the threats to nuclear safety and security and radiological safety and security. The statements today from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to the effect that this operation was aimed at preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon are not justified. They are unfounded. Tehran has consistently stated that it does not have any such plans and that is fulfilling its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Moreover, Iran has repeatedly underscored its readiness to put at the basis of new agreements with
पहले चार्ट फिर ऑर्डर फिर चार्ट ऐसा ही होता है। अरे ये सब आपके जमाने में होता होगा, आज के जमाने में ट्रेडिंग और एनालिसिस सीधे गन चार्ट्स पे होता है। ये देखो
for the unyielding conviction of Master Sergeant Roderick Edmonds, who looked evil in the eyes and did not flinch. We thank you for the battlefield grit of Command Sergeant Major Terry Richardson, courage that saved lives in Vietnam, and courage that stands before us today. And Lord, we thank you for Staff Sergeant Michael Aulis, who, in a final selfless act, made his own body a shield for a friend. Bless the family and friends of these great men of honor, O Lord, and forbid that we leave this place as mere admirers of their heroic deeds. Plant in our hearts a measure of their courage that we might prove worthy of the freedom for which they and generations before them defended. Lord, now let the light of liberty continue to shine on our great nation. We pray in the strong name of the one who guides us. This will defend. Amen.
very much, Chaplain Green. Wonderful job. Appreciate it. And thank everybody for being here, and please feel free to sit. So before we begin this important ceremony, and there's no ceremony that can be much more important than this, let me provide a brief update on Operation Epic Fury. Today, the United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime. Following our obliteration of Iran's nuclear program in Operation Midnight Hammer a short
Tai.
while ago.
Oh.
We warned Iran not to make any attempt to rebuild at a different location because they were unable to use the ones we so powerfully blew up. But they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons. In addition, the regime's conventional ballistic missile program was growing rapidly and dramatically, and this posed a very clear, colossal threat to America and our forces stationed overseas. The regime already had missiles capable of hitting Europe and our bases, both local and overseas, and would soon have had missiles capable of reaching our beautiful America. The purpose of this fast-growing missile program was to shield their nuclear weapon development and make it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to stop them from making these highly forbidden by us nuclear weapons. We were the ones that were complaining. We were the ones that wanted it stopped, but everybody was behind us. They just didn't have the courage to say so. An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat. I was very proud to have knocked out the Iran nuclear deal by President Barack Hussein Obama. That was a horrible, horrible, dangerous document. They would have had nuclear weapons 3 years ago, and they would have used them. But I'll not let that happen. For almost 47 years, this regime has been attacking the United States and killing Americans. Every time you see someone with missing arms and legs or a face that's been absolutely shattered violently, it was almost certainly caused by an Iran roadside bomb. The Iran nuclear regime get stationed. So
Of the own body, a shield for a friend, and generate.
there's no ceremony that can be much more important than this. Let me provide a brief update on Operation Epic Fury. Today, the United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime. Following our obliteration of Iran's nuclear program in Operation Midnight Hammer a short while ago, we warned Iran not to make any attempt to rebuild at a different location because they were unable to use the ones we so powerfully blew up. But they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons. In addition, the regime's conventional ballistic missile program was growing. The purpose of this fast-growing missile program was to shield their development and make it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to stop them from making these highly forbidden by us nuclear weapons. We were the ones that were complaining. We were the ones that wanted it stopped, but everybody was behind us. They just didn't have the courage to say so. An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat. I was very proud to have knocked out the Iran nuclear deal by President Barack Hussein Obama. That was a horrible, horrible, dangerous document. They would have had nuclear weapons 3 years ago, and they would have used them. But I'll not let that happen. For almost 47 years, this regime has been attacking the United States and killing Americans. Every time you see someone with missing arms and legs or a face that's been absolutely shattered. going rapidly and dramatically. And this posed a very clear destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis and their capacity to produce brand new ones and pretty good ones that destroying Iran's missile capabilities and has been attacking the United nuclear weapon. Never going to have a nuclear weapon. I said that from the beginning. They're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. And we thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people. You got to do it the right way. Today, we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action and send our love and support to their families. In their memory, we continue this mission with ferocious, unyielding resolve to crush the threat this terrorist regime poses to the American people, and a threat indeed it is. We have the strongest and most powerful by far military in the world, and we will easily prevail. We're already substantially ahead of our time projections, but whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored. There's nothing boring about this. Do you agree with that, Pete? I don't think there's anything, Mr. General. I think there's nothing boring about it. Somebody actually said from the media, I think you'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I guarantee you that, to go through what I had to go through. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership. And as you know, that was done in about an hour. So we're ahead of schedule there by a lot. But please join me in thanking every American service member who bravely is standing in harm's way. They really are incredible. And I just want to thank you. We have a lot of them right here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We have a lot of great service members here with us too in this beautiful building. Isn't it beautiful? We're adding on to the building a little bit. We're improving the building. See that nice drape? When that comes down right now, you see a very, very deep hole. But in about a year and a half from now, you're going to see a very, very beautiful building. And there's your entrance to it right there. In fact, it looks so nice, I think I'll save money on the doors because it can't get more beautiful than that. I picked those drapes in my first term. I always like gold, but I think we can save a lot of money. I just saved curtains, but and it'll be spectacular. It'll be the most beautiful ballroom. I believe it's because I built many a ballroom. I believe it's going to be the most.
আইটা তোমার টেনশন চিন্তা চোখে মাইনা হইছে চিন্তা কি তহঁতে নাজানো সন্তান জন্ম দিয়াৰ সময়ত মাকৰ জীৱন শেষ হৈ যোৱা সেই অন্ধকাৰৰ দিনটো তহঁতে দেখা নাই
মাতৃসকলক কৰা অৱহেলাৰ এই দিনবোৰ মনত ৰাখিছে অসমে। Doesn't like it. I love it. You know what? To me, other than here, because we're donating it, not a penny to the taxpayer. It'll be under budget, ahead of schedule. It'll be 400 million or less. Most people say 400 million or more. No, it'll be less. But when I hear that sound, that beautiful sound behind me, it means money. So I like it. But my wife isn't thrilled. She said, this is getting crazy. I said, don't worry about it. We'll be all finished up in a few months. But now for the reason that we're gathered this morning to recognize the unsurpassed courage of three really incredible American heroes, one living and two no longer with us. So together, we recognize the exceptional valor of Master Sergeant Roderick Edmonds. And maybe I could ask your families to stand because they're beautiful families. I got to meet them, and please. So Staff Sergeant Michael Wallace and Command Sergeant Major Terry Richardson, as they receive our nation's highest military award, the Congressional Medal of Honor. And we're pleased to be joined by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Busy, he's busy, very busy guy. In fact, I said, if you want, Pete, you can avoid it. General Raisin Kane also, and they said, we don't avoid this one. This is one you wouldn't avoid for anything, right? So we appreciate that you're here. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who's doing an incredible job, Veterans Affairs. Doug Collins. Doug, thank you. You a stand-up, Doug. You're doing such a good job. 92% approval rating. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, who's known as Raisin Kane. I liked him when I heard that name, Raisin Kane. I said, if it's true, you're my guy. And it's true. It's turned out, it's very true. He's a great guy and a great general. Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, and Army Chief of Staff, Randy George. Thank you. Thank you both, Dan. As well as Senators Tom Cotton, Bill Hagerty. You guys were great on television this weekend. I'll tell you what, can't have a better representative than both of you. Thank you very much. And Representatives Tim Burchett, Jack Bergman, and Nicole Malliotakis. So we have a few others sitting here, but I'm not going to go through it because we have far more important people to honor today. Oh, we have Tom Homan. I got to at least mention Tom Homan. I would be a stand-up, Tom. What a job. Zero people coming in. We had millions and millions of people pouring into our country now that, I mean, I'm not even sure I can believe this number is zero, but it is given out by Democrats. They're Democrats from the left. And they're rated for the last 9 months. We had zero people come illegally through our border. Right, Tom? So I want to thank you very much. And I also want to salute 6 former Medal of Honor recipients: William Swenson, Jim McLuhan, Walter Marm, Thomas Payne, Sammy Davis. That's an interesting guy. Where is Sammy Davis? We have a big story here, Sammy. You've heard that all your life, I'll bet, huh? And Edward Byers, stand up, please. The next two we recognize today serve no idea, but the area tested with nearly 300 enemy bunkers and many, many enemy soldiers, far outnumbering men, had one chance of survival. That was air support. Acting without regard of his own life, he grabbed the radio and charged up Hill 222 alone. He needed to be there. It was the only place you'd get reception. He withstood a storm of enemy bullets, eventually reaching the top, where he spent the next 8 hours calling in tactical strikes, completely exposed. An hour in, an enemy sniper shot rang out and the bullet tore through his right leg violently. He was in bad shape, but Terry disregarded that and pushed through. And after 7 more hours of calling in American fire from above, the enemy retreated. Later that day, his team found him with both eardrums totally ruptured and a mangled right leg and foot, but still barely living, but living nevertheless. Due to Terry's actions above and beyond the call of duty, 82 men, Alpha Company, survived this battle, including 2 in this room, Norm Meyer and Dave Himmer. Where are you? Can you want to stand up, Norm and Dave? Where's Norm and Dave? Pretty good. And that story is 100% correct, isn't it? Huh? See, pretty. It's how much have you paid him over the years? Have you said take everything we have? We wouldn't be here, right? That's great. That's a great story. Terry, today you enter the ranks of the bravest warriors ever to stride the face of the earth. Please stand up, please. Thank you.
इसको फोन करो ना भाई को नंबर देखो तुम तो लिखा था तेरा फोन नंबर
That's great, Terry. That's a great, brave man. I met him back there. He said, he's central casting. Look at him. He looks great. He looks great. You feel like fighting? I think we could take him today. What do you think, Pete? We'll make a little deal with him, as you are a brave man. Finally, we honor one more American soldier, a fallen warrior of world, of wars, and really, terror. Staff Sergeant Michael Hollis, born in 1988 on Staten Island. Michael grew up seeing the World Trade Center across the bay. I know Staten Island so well. The people in Staten Island are amazing. After 9/11, Michael enlisted in the Army, and by 24 years old, he was locked in. He loved it. He wanted it so badly. He was a squad leader serving in Afghanistan with the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment, 1st Brigade Combat Team of the legendary 10th Mountain Division. On August 28th, 2013, terrorists detonated a 400-pound car bomb on the east wall of the forward operating base, Ghazni, ripping open a 60-foot wide breach into a compound that housed NATO coalition forces, a lot of them. 10 Taliban fighters wearing suicide vests swarmed through. From across the compound, Michael saw the pillar of white smoke rising and ran to join the fight, rushing without his gear, wearing almost no gear, no Kevlar helmet, no body armor, just one magazine in his rifle. Along the way, he encountered a Polish soldier, and together they advanced under heavy fire, very, very heavy fire. At one point, shrapnel ripped through the Polish soldier's legs, rendering him unable to walk, very, very severely hurt. In that chaos of gunfire, explosions, and charred human remains, a terrorist insurgent appeared, rounding a corner with his suicide vest fully armed, and you could see it. It was going to happen. He charged the wounded Polish soldier without hesitation. Michael raised his gun and forced himself between the insurgent and the man he just met, shielding him with his own body. He knew it was going to happen. He shielded him with his own body. You know, bravery's amazing. You never really know who's brave, who's not until they're really tested. We think some people are brave, Pete, and they're not. We think others aren't, and they are. You never know. But he was tested. That's called the ultimate test, right? And at perhaps his final heartbeat, Michael fired his weapon, and the terrorist detonated his vest simultaneously. Staff Sergeant Ullis was killed just weeks before his 25th birthday, and nobody was any more brave than that. In his final act on earth, Michael absorbed the blast, sparing the life of that Polish warrior. We are grateful to have in the room with us today Second Lieutenant Carol Sierpika. Carol Sierpika. Where are you, Carol? Hey. Would you like to come up? Please. I'd love to have you come up. Thank you, Carol.
Mr. President, Minister of War, I'm Minister Polish of National Defense, distinguished guests, everyone gathered here today, you my Basha, Michael, and Jacob, especially dear Linda and Robert, and the entire Always family. What do you have that you did not receive? This is how I would like to begin these few words, to speak to you all here. In this special place and on occasion of this incredibly important ceremony, one that is significant for many, but truly especially exceptional for me, is a particular privilege and a great honor. Above all, however, it is my commitment. It is a part of my new mission, which began 13 years ago. A soldier is not something you are from time to time. It is who you are forever. It is just like you are not a mother, a father, a sister, and brother, or as only for a moment. These are not rules given to us for a while.
All right, we're going to leave that Medal of Honor ceremony in Washington to bring in once again our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. Kimberly, before the ceremony began, President Trump said some words about the operation against Iran, saying that they projected that it would take some 4 to 5 weeks, but that they're prepared to go much longer. What did you make of it?
Yeah, that's right. This is significant because this is the first time that the U.S. president has spoken live before reporters. When he returned on Sunday evening from Mar-a-Lago, where he was when the Iran strikes began, what we know is that he avoided the reporters and their questions. So this is significant because this is the first time he's addressed Iran inside the White House. Now, what's important to note here is that the U.S. president also, for the first time, has really, despite claiming so in his pre-recorded videos that he's released on social media, this was the first time that on live TV he explained to the American people why diplomacy broke down in his view and why the Operation Epic Fury was launched. He said that following what he called the obliteration, the strikes of the U.S. on Iran back in June of 2025. He said that Iran began to rebuild its nuclear program, ignoring the warnings of the United States. And so as a result, he says, there, in terms of the diplomacy, had been this effort to try and limit the nuclear program. They had a deal twice, the U.S. president said. But then he said that at the last minute, Iran, he claims, backed out. And he said, I can't deal with these people. And that's why he decided to initiate the attack. So what we know is that he is also justifying this attack, saying that, in fact, Iran was using its conventional ballistic missile program to shield the nuclear ambitions. He also said that they would soon have a missile that would reach the United States. And that's really important because the intelligence that's been provided publicly so far suggests that there was no imminent threat. In fact, the earliest that Iran could have had that weapons program that would allow for a missile that could do devastation of the scale the president is suggesting would be 8 years at minimum. But the U.S. president says instead that it was the last best chance for the United States to strike, and that's why he launched the mission.
All right, Kimberly, for the moment, many thanks. Our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. The president is still speaking. Let's listen in once again.
All three families, I said, good. I see some of the young ones today. I said, you have good genes. They were asking me, what does that mean? I said, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. But you have the best genes you can have, actually. So thank you for giving America your beloved son. And now I would like to ask the military aide to come forward and read the citations, and then we will do the honors. Thank you all very much. This is a tremendous honor for me to be here. Thank you. Please, military aide.
Okay, we're going to leave that ceremony once again and move on. We'll come back to it if President Trump says anything that we think that you ought to hear. This is Al Jazeera with continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran, which is spreading fast across the region. In Iran, Israeli strikes have targeted the capital Tehran once again. The Red Crescent said that more than 130 cities have come under fire over the last 3 days. They come as the US Defense Secretary promised the joint military operation would not become an endless war. Mohammed Val joins us now live from Tehran. Mohammed, the US and Israel say that they will continue to strike Iran. What's the latest?
Well, there has been a lull over the last couple of hours. We haven't had big explosions here in Tehran, but during the last 24 hours, it was a non-stop campaign of bombardment across Iran. And the information we have from the authorities here is that at least 9 hospitals have been hit since the beginning of this campaign. So there is a focus here on facilities that can facilities that, if hit, will be touching the lives of civilians. The authorities talking about 175 students killed, scores of civilians here and there killed and wounded. So the targets are being widened across the country. They include, as I said, hospitals, they include police stations, they include other facilities that are not clearly military or semi-military or security institutions. So there is this fear that this campaign is going to take another level, and that the punishment will be severe on civilians here in Iran. President Pezeshkian said that in a message to the government institutions that they have to make sure that everything that is necessary for the livelihood and for the survival of people and for their health and so on should be provided. An indication there that the government is still in charge and that it is taking care of the people. We have strikes that are reported in many cities today, including Al-Ahwaz, including Bushehr, including Sonandaj, including Karaj. Lots of cities have been hit today, and there are pictures of civilians killed and wounded even in the heart of the city of Tehran. We have seen those pictures, and also damage to civilian facilities, including cars and so on, and a lot of debris and destruction in the streets. But this is not, according to the Iranian authorities, this is not going to really make them bow down for this campaign, and they are talking about heavier missiles, supersonic, hypersonic ballistic missiles being used now in this campaign. They're talking about striking targets across the Gulf, targets that are American in particular, and talking about tankers that have been hit, and lots of other types of facilities belonging to the Americans, particularly the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. There are reports from the Islamic IRCG that it has been hit badly or even destroyed. So there is this rhetoric of war and this rhetoric of victory and of force, power to counteract this campaign, and the ability to continue this campaign for as long as it takes.
Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val reporting live from Tehran. Mohammed, many thanks indeed. Iran has targeted sites across Israel. Again, the Israeli military says that missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Eilat. At least 10 people have been killed in Israel since Saturday. Al Jazeera's Noor Odeh is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. What's the latest there, Noor?
Well, Adrian, we have fresh reports of possibly drone infiltration from the north. The Israeli army suspects that they came from Lebanon. The incident was dealt with quite quickly and the drones were downed, but this is an indication that the tensions and the escalation at the Lebanese front will only escalate given a predictable Israeli reaction of a retaliation. The Israeli bombardment, of course, on Lebanon, on Beirut itself, continues. And in the meantime, cities across Israel, from Netanya and Herzliya in the northern coastal area to Tel Aviv, all the way down to Asqalan or Ashkelon, and everything east of that, all the way to the borders with Jordan, which includes, of course, much of the occupied West Bank. All of that area has had successive sirens going off throughout the day. Most of the damage reported was in Ashkelon, where several buildings sustained damage. More than a couple of dozen people were treated for injuries. Only one of the injuries was described as moderate. We do not know about the other incidents where the shrapnel and the missiles fell, because again, the Israeli military censor has made it a point of deciding what images the Israeli public sees and the world sees really about this war. And this is very important, especially given the fact that the Israeli government is now telling the public that this war will go on for weeks. And that is very important because it will have security and economic implications for Israelis. Remember, the last confrontation with Iran was 12 days. In those 12 days, Israel's stockpile of air defense missiles was running low. So weeks of fighting, weeks of strikes and counterstrikes between Israel and Iran will have a lot of Israelis worrying about the prospects.
Noor, many thanks indeed. Well, the conflict is affecting energy prices. European gas prices have surged by more than 50% after Qatar's state-run energy company halted LNG, or liquefied natural gas production. The suspension follows Iranian attacks on two major facilities. Qatar shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. Oil prices are also up. Brent crude was trading at about $82 a barrel on Monday. That's the highest since January last year, and up 13% from Friday's close. Well, here's a look at energy installations and transport facilities that Iran has targeted. Explosions were reported at Ras Laffan Industrial City in Qatar. It houses two major LNG refineries as well as energy processing infrastructure. The Ras Tanura plant in Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil refineries. It handles more than 500,000 barrels a day. And in Dubai, debris from an attack fell near Jebel Ali port, disrupting energy and logistics operations. In the Gulf of Oman, a projectile hit an oil tanker transporting crude, while another tanker caught fire after an attack in the Strait of Hormuz. My colleague Mohammed Jamjoom is live for us now in Doha. Tell us more about Qatar's energy infrastructure being targeted, Mohammed, and its impact.
Adrian, this happened earlier in the day. This was a major attack. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company announced that they halted all production of liquefied natural gas after Iranian attacks on two of its facilities. And as you mentioned, as a result, the energy prices across Europe soared after that announcement was made. Qatar, of course, is the world's largest producer of liquefied natural gas. So this was something that really was crossing a red line here, something that had not happened before, something that showed how significant these attacks by Iran have become over the past few days. And not too long after we heard about that attack that happened in Qatar, you also were hearing about the attack that happened by Iran against the Ras Tanura oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. That, of course, is in the eastern province. And then you had the Saudis announcing that they were temporarily shutting down some units of that Ras Tanura oil refinery after a fire broke out. Again, one of the things that has been so important to Qatar and other Gulf states over the course of the last numerous decades is the fact that they've been able to safely and securely export their energy products to the rest of the world. So when an attack like this happens, when there are attacks on energy infrastructure, whether it be in Qatar, whether it be in Saudi Arabia by Iran, this really takes this conflict into a whole new dimension. Already in the course of the last few days, you've seen various red lines crossed. Now, more red lines have been crossed. Of course, there was this statement from the U.S., Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. They issued a joint statement a few hours back in which they condemned Iranian attacks across the region, and they affirmed their right to self-defense. And that's one of the big questions right now is, if this continues to escalate over the course of the next few days, are you going to see these countries joining and giving some kind of a response, potentially militarily, to Iran going forward? Adrian?
Mohammed, many thanks indeed. There have been more Israeli strikes on the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in the last hour. Earlier, an Israeli attack on the capital killed at least 31 people, including a senior Hezbollah official. At least 149 people were injured in that attack. There have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it targeted more than 70 Hezbollah facilities, including weapons storage facilities. Israel says the attacks are in response to the rockets and drones that Hezbollah fired into Israel earlier on Monday. The group says its attack was in response to the assassination of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. After the strikes, Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said that he's banned all Hezbollah military and security activities. Al Jazeera's Zaina Hodder was reporting from Beirut when some of those Israeli strikes hit the capital.
Well, we just saw that strike come in. The Israeli army has threatened to carry out a series of airstrikes in numerous areas across Lebanon, singling out, for example, every branch of Qard al-Hassan. This is a financial institution belonging to Hezbollah, saying that they will target all their branches across the country. Behind me, you see the smoke. This is Beirut's southern suburbs. A cluster of neighborhoods which is now largely empty. Since the early hours of the morning, the hundreds of thousands of residents who live in this area have left. We've seen, there's another strike. Let's see where. Yes, Israel really keeping up this pressure, promising, saying that it is launching an offensive against Hezbollah, expecting a few days of fighting, saying that it intends to intensify the strikes, increase the strikes, and promising Hezbollah that it will pay the price for firing a barrage of rockets across the border in the early hours of the morning in retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. So Israel stepping up its military campaign, threatening to target many areas. When they issue these evacuation orders, basically what it means is that it is causing mass displacement, further displacement, forcing families to make way to safer areas. And this in itself is pressure.
The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has condemned Iran while addressing MPs in Parliament. He says allies in the Gulf are furious over Iran's wide-reaching attacks.
It is very clear that the death of the Supreme Leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. In fact, their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. They are working ruthlessly and deliberately for a plan to strike not only military targets, but also economic targets in the region, with no regard for civilian casualties. That is the situation we face today, and to which we must respond.
Iran has told the International Atomic Energy Agency that Israel and the United States attacked its nuclear facilities on Sunday. But IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi says there's no indication that any of the sites have been hit. However, he's warned that attacks risk causing radiation releases, which could impact countries beyond Iran's borders. Grossi also says that the agency is still trying to contact Iranian nuclear authorities. So far, it's been without response. Next up here on Al Jazeera, Inside Story asks about the risks for Israel in opening another battlefront with Iran while it's still attacking Gaza and Lebanon.
Israel's assault on Iran comes while it's still attacking Gaza and Lebanon. After bombing Syria, Yemen and Qatar in the past year, what are the risks for Israel opening another battlefront and the risks from the collapse or survival of the Islamic Republic? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Rashad Salamat. Israel is at war yet again, and for the second time in a year against Iran. It comes as Israeli attacks continue in Lebanon and Gaza, where it's killed more than 72,000 Palestinians. Since 2024, it's also bombed Syria, Yemen, and Qatar. Israel says it wants regime change and to stop Iran from developing a nuclear bomb, something the Islamic Republic denies doing. Only two outcomes are possible. Iran either survives or falls, but could both scenarios pose dangers for Israel? Could a more emboldened or hardline Iran emerge? Or could regional chaos unfold with widespread humanitarian and economic impacts, which could hit Israel's Western allies hard? We'll explore more with our guest shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
Israeli attacks are expanding across the Middle East, now drawing in Lebanon and Iran's ally, Hezbollah. The Israeli military is warning all options are on the table there, including a ground operation. On Monday, Israel bombarded Iran with a fresh wave of strikes, hitting a hospital in the capital Tehran, as well as police stations. Both the US and Israel say they want regime change. The first attacks, launched on Saturday, assassinated the supreme leader and wiped out much of Iran's top military command. But the Red Crescent says the death toll is far greater, more than 550 people so far. Among the victims, children, killed in a joint US-Israeli strike that hit a girls' school. And the Iranian government hasn't fallen. It's created an interim leadership council and is working on choosing the next supreme leader. Apparently unswayed, the Israeli prime minister is promising an escalation.
We are in a campaign in which we are bringing the full force of the Israeli Defense Forces as never before. But we are also bringing into this campaign the assistance of the United States. And this enables us to do what I have long hoped to do for 40 years, to strike the terror regime decisively.
Benjamin Netanyahu has long viewed Iran as Israel's most dangerous existential threat. But the consequences of yet another war are quickly being felt. Iran has launched drones and missiles at Israel, sending many people into underground shelters. In one attack on the city of Beit Shemesh, several people were killed and others are still missing, believed to be buried under the rubble.
It's just devastating, really devastating. People are killed here, not only in the synagogue, but also mother and daughter who live in that house.
Israeli reaction to yet another war is mixed.
The situation is the best that can be for the Middle East and all the world, all the free world, because now we are in the path to a different regime in Iran.
I think this war was no needed. It's only for political things, only for Bibi to stay on the government.
As the death toll rises and instability continues, Netanyahu will need to be clear about how these conflicts benefit Israelis. He's facing an election this year, an ongoing corruption trial, and is wanted at The Hague, accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest. Alon Pinkas is a former ambassador and consul general of Israel in New York. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Rami Khouri is a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. He joins us from Boston. And in West Jerusalem is Mitchell Barak, founder of Kivun Research, Strategy and Communications, and a former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A warm welcome to all of you. Mitchell, going to start things off with you and just get us a broad brushstroke of how you see things unfolding.
First of all, I'd like to wish a Ramadan Kareem to all of the people watching who are celebrating and commemorating this holiday. It is also a fast day in Israel, the Fast of Esther, which commemorates, ironically and interestingly enough, the victory of the Jewish people over an evil Persian Empire 2,500 years ago. So this is a holiday week for everyone. Kids are off from school anyway, tomorrow and the next day. So now they have the full week off. And it really is coming to life, this whole Purim story, this whole story of Persia and defeating an evil empire. But I must say that a lot of people are really behind this effort because they believe the words of the Islamic Republic of Iran that has been saying for many, many years that Israel has no right to exist. Death to America, death to Israel, like we just heard the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War of the United States say in a live press conference.
Rami, it's very easy to start a war, but it's very hard to end one successfully. So one has to look at the aims here.
Well, I think the aims are pretty clear from the American and the Israeli side, and they've been talking about this for years. There's nothing hidden. They want to get rid of Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities, make sure it never has a weapon, which is the aim that Iran itself says it never wants a weapon, but that's secondary because the Israeli and American governments tend not to deal with the reality, but they tend to deal with what they perceive to be dangerous to them or ancient myths from thousands of years ago. In either case, the clear aim is to get rid of the nuclear capability, no more missiles, no more linkages for Iran with its allies across the region, who the Israelis and Americans call proxies, but we call them their strategic allies. And they want, I think what most people would want is to live a normal life in peace. But there's a bigger dimension to what Israel is doing, which is not often sufficiently discussed or analyzed, and the Israelis have to clarify this. They would like to make sure that nobody in the whole Middle East and all of West Asia can possibly threaten them, which in itself is a kind of reasonable aim. Every country in the world wants that. But they also want to be able to determine how things are done in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, in Palestine, in Yemen. They want to have a strategic hegemonic dominance in the region without formally occupying these countries. And this coincides with a rising right-wing messianic religious ethnic nationalist extremist militant trend in Israel, which is in the government now. And even government officials have talked, some ministers have talked about, oh yeah, it's mirroring what U.S. Ambassador Huckabee said, oh, Israel should go and, it's okay if he wants to take over Iran or Syria or Iraq, whatever the Bible says. We have these wider dimensions that are troubling, and the immediate issues of nuclear and missile issues, those can be resolved. I think there's no doubt about that. But the wider Israeli goals are much more problem.
Alon, the UN nuclear watchdog chief
Well
Rafael
said,
Grossi said on Monday that his agency stands by their assessment. There's no indication that Iran's nuclear facilities have been damaged in this latest barrage of strikes on the country. So does it make it even more clear that this is all about regime change fundamentally?
Well, look, President Trump, Rashid, went on record in June saying that, quote unquote, we obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities after the American / Israeli attack on three major nuclear installations. Furthermore, American intelligence has indicated under the Trump administration, by the way, that Iran has not pursued or has not developed its military nuclear program beyond what it did since the U.S. left the agreement, left unilaterally, withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018. In May of 2018, that was under Trump's first term. Now, ostensibly, yes, both the U.S. and Israel claim that this is about regime change. How they plan to go by this, look, there's no instance, there's no example in history for regime change being induced via air power and missile attacks. Bar one example, one unique example, and that's Japan in 1945 under the threat of a very credible land invasion and following two atomic bombs. So that is definitely not the case. How the U.S. and Israel plan to induce regime change or just weaken the regime remains unclear. Look, we're only 48 hours into this war, and making any kind of broad brush assessments or conclusions that this is going into X or toward Y would be seriously and wildly premature. But yes, in terms of what you just asked, it looks like regime change, and Mr. Netanyahu attested to that himself in that video that you just, in that footage that you just showed a moment ago, that this has been his dream, his yearning, he called it, for 40 years to change the regime. He's in his defense, he's been consistent and adamant about this, but this is not about nuclear power. This is about regime change.
Mitchell, how does killing the supreme leader move the needle?
Well, this is the head of the snake for many, many years. This is the person that has sponsored terrorism all over the world and has proxies. You can call them, Rami, strategic allies, but many of them are terrorists. We've had diplomats, people that Alon Pincus knew, who were killed in Argentina. I mean, based on operations and funding from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And, there's this talk about the destroying of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. What revolution are they protecting? What Islamic Republic actually lobs missiles at innocent civilians in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia? Who does this?
What nonsense, man.
Why would people stand for this? Why would the world stand for this kind of threat? This man was a dangerous menace to humanity, and he cloaked himself in religion. It's a very, very difficult thing. And it was directly threatening, said that Israel has no right to exist, and on many occasions said Israel will one day no longer exist, and he will make that happen. And, sometimes you have to take neighborhood bullies like the Islamic Republic of Iran at their very words. And if they say they're going to do it, and everything indicates that they will, then they actually will. And the sad part of this whole thing is when the revolution started in 1979, they poured hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars and know-how into better ways to kill Jewish and Israeli people and better ways to promote terror. And imagine what would have happened if they invested all of that money. And they're very, very smart. They've developed some great missiles that have hit Israel and gotten through our defenses. What if they invested that money in healthcare, finding a cure for cancer, agriculture, poverty? They could really have a great place in Iran. But instead they invested in death and destruction and ideology. It's sad.
Rami.
Yeah, that's a fascinating explanation from Mitchell about what, is traditional Israeli Zionist perspectives. Well, most of it is exaggerated, diversionary, some of it is not true, and most of it is not really relevant. It's just the traditional way that Israelis and pro-Israeli groups discuss these issues. The idea that it's bad to fire missiles at civilians after Israel has been called by the International Court of Justice a genocidal state for lobbying, killing tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. So, but we don't have time to get into these point by points. We should do that one other time over coffee somewhere. The reality is that the state of Israel is the power in the region with the United States. They're the ones that have been going around and essentially one after the other, starting with Iran and then Syria, Libya, Iraq, starting with Iraq, I mean, and the Palestinians with Lebanon, hitting anybody who they think threatens them. It's fair enough for countries to want to live in peace, and the Arab countries, including Iran, by the way, Iran has said for many years that they will live with whatever agreement the Palestinians agree with Israel on. And the Palestinians, through their institutions, have said they're willing to live with a Jewish majority Israeli state if it lives with a Palestinian state. So we should focus really on what actually is happening on the ground. And the bigger threat, I think, that we see is Israel trying to destabilize countries and fragment them into smaller entities. We've seen it in Lebanon, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Palestine. They try to make deals with minority groups in different countries. They don't want any strong, stable, legitimate countries around them that could challenge them, not necessarily challenge them to destroy them, but challenge them to force the Israelis to do things they've never done, which is to define their borders, implement the UN resolutions that Israel said it would implement. Israel never implemented terms of acceptance into the UN in 1948. So we really should focus on how can these people live together, Iran, Arabs, Israelis. They can, I believe.
Alon, have a look now at, well, if there is regime change, how does it affect Israel itself?
Well, depending on the regime. I mean, people were talking about regime change in Iraq and Syria, and we got ISIS. People were talking about regime change in Egypt, and we got the Muslim Brotherhood. Israel has been arrogantly pursuing regime change in Lebanon, and look where that led to. And so the question is, what is the new regime going to look like? If anyone is looking for a Thomas Jefferson to take over the reins from the Ayatollahs from the Islamic Republic, that's not going to happen. If anyone is thinking in terms of reverting back or going back to the Shah days, that's not going to happen. Regime change in history is something that is a bottoms up process. It does not and cannot be affected by an outside power unless that country is occupied, as was Iraq, as was Japan or Germany post 1945. So I don't see regime change in the absence of a clear opposition in Iran, with which Israel and the U.S., and I hasten to say Israel because I think that having strategic delusions of grandeur has damaged Israel in the past. This is not to say anything about Israel's enmity and justification for this war, justifications, plural in this sense, or in this war. But I really find it very difficult, and I think it is extraordinarily not viable to think of regime change right now.
Mitchell, if we do see a change in the regime there, what is a win for Israel? What is a lose for Israel?
Well, first of all, I like to just give a little history. I know people don't like the history so much, but, February 1979 was the last time El Al had a direct flight from Tehran to Tel Aviv. In the 1970s, we had 4 flights a week. I mean, we had relations with Iran, okay? But, so Israelis and Iranians were very, very closely connected. We had a lot of businesses together, a lot of tourism, and so forth. So for a lot of Israelis, there are still Israelis of Persian descent that are looking forward to going back and looking forward to, helping develop that country. But back to your question about a win for Israel is getting rid of the threat. And they are very, very capable with the missiles that they've developed, with the nuclear capability, which we think they might have, or they were getting close to. So that first has to be stopped. That's automatically a win. And we already won because when Israel went together with the United States, it's not like the last war in June when it was Israel first, then the United States joined. Israel and the United States started this operation together, this war together. This is absolutely unprecedented, and it is very, very important. It's an important message that the security of Israel and the United States is aligned, and both are putting their firepower and troops and people and civilians on the line. A lose? I don't see how that happens, meaning even if there isn't exactly a regime change, you know, as Secretary Hegseth just said in the live press conference, you know, after June, when the nuclear capabilities were pretty much destroyed, they said to the Iranians, it's destroyed, now let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. They could have stayed in power. All they had to do was make a deal, and they were given chance after chance after chance, including last week and the week before, to come make a deal. And there would be no talk of regime change, and none of this would have happened.
How do you respond to that, Rami?
Well, I disagree with most of it, but it is a very accurate reflection of Israeli government views, which reflect the right-wing Messianic militant majority that now seems to dominate Israel, which is supported by the American right-wing government. So the deal, I think making deals is good. We should definitely make deals between Israel and all the Arab countries and Iran, but any deal has to serve the legitimate rights and interests of both sides. We can't have, when you go in and bomb somebody and destroy them and try to bring them to their knees and then make a deal, that's not a deal. That's colonial subjugation, and we've done that. We've experienced that for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the Iranians have suffered under colonial manipulation for many years. The Israelis and the Americans, by the way, for the last 75 years or so, have prevented two people in the region mainly from practicing their self-determination to live in their own system. The Israelis have hit it, and the Americans have done it to Iran, and they've done it to the Palestinians. And that's why Palestinians and Iranians today are the two groups that most vehemently resist Israel and the U.S. But this all can be resolved through negotiations, but only if the negotiations legitimately address the rights of both sides. And this is what Israel has refused to do. Israel has always put its own security as the priority, and if its security is assured and guaranteed, then the Israelis will give something to the other side. They've done this. They've tried this in other places with the Palestinians, for instance, with Oslo and other things. And look what they've got. They've got now a rampant annexation in the West Bank and a genocide in Gaza. So people don't trust the Israelis or the Americans now to keep their word. And this is why it's so critical to get some really serious mediation internationally underway, because a negotiated peaceful resolution is the ideal. And we should all work for that. This constant warfare.
Yeah.
I'm 77 years old. I was born in 48. I've lived with this all my life. I'd rather have a normal relationship, and it can be done if the Israelis accept that, which they don't.
Alon, could the first impact on the Israeli body politic be the upcoming election, which could see this war actually help the incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think it's premature to seriously assess that. There's no question, Rashad, that Mr. Netanyahu is trying to remove himself from his responsibility for the worst catastrophe and debacle in Israel's history. That is October 7, 2023, and somehow engineer or manipulate reality, geopolitics, and turning that debacle into some kind of a strategic triumph via defeating Iran. I understand the logic of that. Whether or not that would translate into electoral benefits or gains remains to be seen. There's no election date right now. Supposedly, legally, it is scheduled for October, but it could happen. If the war ends and Mr. Netanyahu concludes that it was a resounding victory, he may try and call for a snap election within 90 days. And we're already in March, so 90 days would take us to June. And we're not far away from the legally binding date or scheduled election of October. So it really depends on how this evolves, because as you began at the outset of this program, the show, we all know how wars begin, and we can all analyze and see clearly what the absolute interests and benefits of each side, but we have zero idea how they evolve. We have no idea how bad things can get, or for that matter, how quickly positive they can turn. I don't know. I think it really is premature to assess any political implications.
Rami, is the worst case scenario for Israel essentially a regime change in the sense that you get an even more emboldened regime, perhaps one which is run by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC?
That would definitely be something that Israel would not want, but we essentially have that now. I mean, you can't get much more emboldened than the government that has existed in Iran since 1979. But the idea of totally removing the Islamic government concept and replacing it with something milder is a little bit naive, I think. The majority of Iranians would like to have a better government, a more efficient government, a less corrupt government, and less autocratic government. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, the Iranians have lived over the last century with a lot of foreign manipulation from from Russians, from Americans, from British, from Israelis, and they're fed up with it. And they just want to define themselves. The Islamic Revolution was the first one that sort of did this in a way, but it's pretty harsh kind of government. But that's not the point. It's not for Israel to determine the degree of kindness or harshness of any government. The responsibility of governments is to abide by the law and not be belligerent to each other. So I think the Israelis are going to have to live with whatever comes out of Iran. But if you look at Palestine as an example, or Lebanon, for years, Israel has bludgeoned the Palestinians and the Lebanese, and they've only continued to resist more fiercely. So there has to be a better way than military superiority.
Mitchell, how do you respond?
Well, first of all, Rami has said some things about the Netanyahu government and some of the Messianic people here. So the good news is, Rami, that in October there will be an election, and of the 9 million people that are going to vote here, 2 million of them are Israelis of Palestinian descent, Arabic speakers. So you should encourage all of your friends, relatives, and anyone you know to go out and vote in the election. It's a democracy, and there are many, many Arabic-speaking Israelis of Palestinian descent serving in the Knesset, and they certainly have the right to criticize, and they do that. And I think a lot of Israelis are not particularly thrilled with this government, especially when it comes to not that, but the draft of and the service of all Israelis equally, all Jewish Israelis equally in the army, and not giving an exemption to any Israelis for not doing that. So I think we're going to see some changes.
Sorry, Alan, you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Ami said about meddling in Iranian politics. Let's not forget that Iran is not monolithic. There are 93 million inhabitants in Iran. Only 60% of them are Persians. There are Azeris, and there are Turks, and there are Turkmenis, and there are Baluchis, and what have you. So when we're talking about the Islamic Republic and post-war Iran and regime change, yes, no, maybe, or to what extent and along what lines, let's not forget that Iran is not a monolithic country. A lot of things could happen there. Things, for example, that the U.S. never thought of or considered seriously when it dismembered Iraq in 2003. So you never know what's going to come out of this. It could be hell, and it could be paradise. But it's it's an even chance for both either.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our guests, Alan Pinkas, Rami Khouri, Mitchell Barak, and thank you too for watching the program. And you can, of course, see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rashad Salamat, and the whole crew right here in Doha. Bye for now.
It's 18 GMT, 9 p.m. in Qatar. You're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. I'm Fully Batibo with our continuing extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. A weekend of bombing that killed Iran's supreme leader, dragged its neighbors into conflict, shut shipping traffic in the Gulf, is now threatening global energy supplies.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.